So hello and welcome everyone to the Urban Design Panel. I'm Brian Campbell. I'm a member of the Executive Committee, and we'll be introducing our excellent panel presentation today for the Park Avenue Community Project, which for those of you who don't know, the Park Avenue is the last station on the Orange Line going south from Milwaukee. So the Urban Design Panel is sponsored by the Oregon chapters of the American Institute of Architects, the American Planning Association, and the American Society of Landscape Architects, and is composed of urban design professionals from those three organizations. So we are also joined today by Kurt Wilson, who's the Executive Vice President of AIA Oregon. And the AIA has previously hosted this event, as many of you probably know, at the Center for Architecture in Portland, and now generously offers this monthly Zoom meeting until further notice. In addition to a monthly email announcement, our panel presentations can be found on the AIA Oregon event calendar, as well as their weekly Thursdays at 3 newsletter. And participation in any of these events makes you a panel member, so we encourage you to sign up for the information about future panels with the AIA. And Adrienne Morris, who's on the Zoom call here today, will be able to, if you contact her, you can be included in the upcoming announcements and invitations. We also encourage you to send her, I guess, I'm saying that, Adrienne, because I don't know if we have anybody else right now who's taking these.
Yep, that's the plan, Brian.
But the idea is for her to gather up some interesting future presentation ideas for the panel. So we'd like participation from all of you. If you have great ideas, let us know. These presentations are also recorded and are made available on the AIA website. This presentation, I think, will be about 30 minutes long. Oh, hello. Uh-oh. Looks like we have an interloper here. The presentation will be about 30 minutes long and will be followed by a Q&A session. For the Q&A, please pose your questions and comments if you have any in the Zoom chat box. Today, our executive panel member, Brian Sturr, who's going to be managing the chat function for this meeting, and will pose the questions following the presentation. So follow-up questions can also be directly, I guess, directed. I forgot to ask them in advance, but if it's okay.
Yes, we cleared that as well.
You guys want to have presentation or questions after the presentation, the presenters will be able to probably answer those as well too. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the presenters. First of all, there's Lorraine Gonzales. She's a senior planner with Clackamas County. She's representing the project manager today, who's not with us, from the county. Aaron Riom is a senior associate planner and project manager for Sarah Architects and the lead consultant project manager. Anita Yap, founding partner of the Multicultural Collaborative and a longtime planner in Oregon. Anita and I have known each other a long time. Alyssa Piska, sorry, Elisa, that's I butchered that. She's president of Bridge Economic Development, and she's provided economic and real estate expertise for the project along the way. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lorraine, I guess.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome to our presentation. Presentations on the Park Avenue Community Project. To give you a proximity as to where it is, it's that half-mile radius that surrounds the Park Avenue light rail station, which is located at the southeast intersection of Park Avenue and Southeast McLaughlin Boulevard. And before I get started, I do want our team to introduce themselves and identify the responsibilities that they have on this project. So Erin, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Riom. I'm the project manager for the consultant team and a planner with Sarah Architects.
Anita?
Hi, everybody. Anita Yap with the Multicultural Collaborative. I was hired to work with the committee and the community on an equitable community engagement strategy and framework, and also some residential anti-displacement strategies.
And Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alyssa Pishka, President of Bridge Economic Development, and my focus on the project is working on an anti-displacement strategy for the businesses within the corridor.
Thank you. So our agenda today is going to be project context, and we already had our introductions. Next is going to be the equitable engagement strategy, anti-displacement strategy, executing the process, success, and lessons learned, and the Q&A, along with the discussion that Aaron will lead us into. So prior to getting into the depth of the project, I want to give some context to the project. So the project was initiated by a community group that's very robust and engaged in the area, which is located along the corridor of McLaughlin, unincorporated Clackamas County lands. They created their McLaughlin Area Plan, which we refer to as the MAP. And our first efforts of working on this project site was back in 2012 with the Park Avenue Neighborhood Community Plan. The situation on that one is that it was not adopted. So the community has been anxious for us to have an overlay in this particular area. And I'll give you a little history as I move along about why that didn't quite work out on the 2012. Probably the highlighted versions is that the networking on the street system was something that they were not enamored towards, because the intersection for the grid system was impeding on residential development that is in the area. As we go through this project, you'll see the site plan for the project area that'll have a little more, you'll understand a little bit more as to how that was identified. But the community went to our Board of County Commissioners saying that 2012 and now it's 2017, we want something to be done in this area. The board listened to the community and they agreed to move forward with it, with the intent that we have basically a grassroots effort on this. It would be community led. The previous project was to be community led, but it was the traditional format where it's the planning staff and consultants who managed the project. And then we had about 30 members of stakeholders that participated in the process about 3 times. We had meetings with them before going to the public for public workshop sessions. So we changed the dynamics on this particular project. And that was the entire, one of the biggest intents on this project. So to write up the grant, it even started from the very beginning. To write up the grant, we had the community members from MAPIT, 13 members who helped write up the application. It was a Metro application, your community development grant, planning development grant, CPDG. We wrote it up with the help and collaboration, close collaboration with that community membership. And we got approval to move forward with this project. The project's intent is to conduct a neighborhood assessment and create development and design standards for the commercial and multifamily districts within the project area, and to ensure that there is an equitable and inclusive public process throughout the project. As we went through the IGA efforts with Metro, they asked us to break it up in 2 phases based on the 2012, since that project, the Park Avenue Station Area Plan, was not adopted. They didn't want to repeat a similar situation. So they asked that we restructure it by breaking it up in 2 phases. The first phase was to do the neighborhood assessment and provide recommendations on displacement strategies for the added features that the Metro wanted us to do is to ensure that we received an understanding from the community of the McLaughlin Area Plan principles and guidelines, and they were committed to it, they being the community. So once we established that, and also to establish an agreement from the community that they were receptive to revising development and design standards in the McLaughlin corridor area. The difference between the two plans, the previous plan included the residential area within that half-mile radius. This plan, the plan we're working on today, only includes the commercial and the multifamily districts along the corridor, which basically directly abuts the corridor area. But the community is very engaged in respect to hearing their voice and how the impacts of this development could occur, and hearing up front what they wanted to see as their community. So that was phase one. Phase two, that's where we get into the meat of the project, looking at the development and design standards recommendation, finalizing the anti-displacement strategy, developing the equitable engagement strategies, and continuing on with that inclusive public engagement process. Mailers, in order to do the inclusive engagement process, mailers went out to all residents, landowners, business owners in that project area and invited them to be partaking as a community advisory committee. We received many applications, 17 of them moved forward to being on the committee. And throughout the time, since this has actually been occurring since 2018, we've lost a couple members here. And so we're probably working at 14 members at this point in time. The preface over here is very strong that it's community driven. And they have been engaged. We've had at least 30 meetings with our grant management team, which we made sure that a chair and the co-chair from the Community Advisory Committee are staffing on that grant management team. We thus far have had about 15 meetings with the Community Advisory Committee. We've had 3 workshops, and we've done a number of surveys along with each workshop that has been conducted. I think I want to make sure that my time isn't over, and I want to make sure that we get into the real heart of the project. So Erin, would you like to continue?
Sure, thank you, Lorraine. So we've had a couple of descriptions of where this Park Avenue station area is, but I think visuals always help. So here's just a quick perspective view of where the area sits in relation to Portland up there to the north, Milwaukee, just north of our project area, and then Oak Grove and Jennings Lodge are just south of the project area. I also want to give just a quick snapshot of some demographics. This is part of the work that was done in phase 1 that Lorraine was describing, just to get a sense of who's in the community, who are we working with here. So these are some of the area demographics for race. I also want to note that the category for race did not include Hispanic or Latino as an option in the 2010 census. That was included under a separate category for origin. So when you look at these numbers, it looks overwhelmingly white in terms of the community makeup. So just wanted to call out that it does have a growing Latinx population in the area. So that's something to factor in that just isn't reflected in the census data from 2010. Also, just looking at age demographics, the median age for this area is slightly higher than the Portland metro region, and the population of 60 and older is growing and is growing at a higher rate in this area than the millennial population. So something interesting to note. And then finally, residential ownership. This area has a high percentage of renters and a lower percentage of owners relative to the Portland metro area, and certainly relative to the rest of Clackamas County. So that's something that we wanted to factor in, particularly as we looked at what our engagement strategy for the area would look like. So zooming into our study area, this is the half-mile radius around the Park Avenue Max station. As Brian mentioned, it's the terminus of the orange line coming from Portland. And Lorraine noted that in addition to focusing on that half-mile radius, we were even more specifically focused on this area in pink, the general commercial zone directly adjacent to McLaughlin, and then the multifamily residential zone that's in orange when it came to our development and design standards for this project. So if we take a look at what those look like, again, in perspective view, these are our general commercial area in pink and our multifamily residential in orange. One interesting thing to note is that even when you turn the zoning off, you can still see the outline of those zones in that gray and green contrast, where you actually have tree plantings and where you effectively have a sea of asphalt right along McLaughlin Boulevard. Another important thing to note is that it is 2,800 feet from the intersection of Park Ave to the next signalized intersection of Courtney, which folks in the urban design profession know does not promote great walkability. So that's definitely one of the obstacles that we were looking at overcoming as part of this project. Just a quick street view image. This is McLaughlin Boulevard looking south. This is pretty consistent for a lot of the conditions that you see along McLaughlin in this area. You have a very wide roadway. Cars move very, very quickly through the area. And in many instances, you have a sidewalk that has asphalt on one side and asphalt on the other side. And it is a very unpleasant environment for pedestrians to navigate. So with that very brief introduction, I'm going to hand it over to Anita to talk to us about our equitable engagement strategy for the project.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, everybody. So this was a really interesting project. I have to hand it to Clackamas County. This was a bit of a risk for the staff as well as their elected officials. Had some conversation about what that means, but because it was a Metro 2040 grant, show the requirement was to look and center racial equity in projects, as you all may know. So this was a fun exercise, one working with staff and project team, but also with a really engaged advisory committee. I see Nate Ember is on the line here or on Zoom. And so he's one of our members, which is really great. This enthusiastic group of folks who really, really wanted to engage deeply with people who weren't typically engaged. So kind of a strategy that we took, part of the challenge was the public involvement plan was already set through the scope in the grant, which is kind of backwards if you don't know who you're actually engaging with. So we did what we could. So our first step we did, which was called a power analysis for stakeholders. So the committee worked with the county and created a long list of people that they would consider stakeholders in the neighborhood, transit riders who come in and out, future people who might be living here as well, and then the folks who are there, with concern about making sure that people such as houseless folks in particular, people that are renters, people who also don't speak English as their first language, are actually included and centered in engaging with the project. So here's a great photo pre-COVID, as you can tell, where we did actually what I call a stakeholder power analysis. And so these little sticky notes are stakeholders in particular, and we had a grid, and maybe you can go to the next slide, Erin. Oh, so besides having a grid, we also did an kind of a level of engagement. And so this is a modified, what they call Arnstein's ladder of engagement, which is, I think, back from 1969. But it's still the same kind of opportunity to really think about what level of engagement you want to have with stakeholders, going from information, which is more like outreach and education, one way. Consultation is just like, thank you for giving us information, we'll make our decisions. And then it goes up the level of involvement and partnership, and then ownership. So with that, we did on the stakeholder list, we did that as well. And then this power analysis, we have this grid to stick these stakeholders on there from, highly impacted with little influence to down at the bottom right, low impact, but high influence. So for instance, low impact, high influence would be, our elected officials from the Board of County Commissioners, and the folks highly impacted with little influence for folks like the houseless folks living along the corridor. So next slide, Erin. This is a result of our stakeholder power analysis for the Park Ave. So you can see it was a big group of folks in particular and highly impacted with little influence. And we also determined what sort of kind of engagement we wanted to do with these folks. So a lot of houseless people, Spanish speaking, low income, mobile home park residents. I think Youth was another one, seniors, and employees. So this was a really great to help us then create our engagement strategy. And I think the other thing that I did also was I interviewed the advisory committee, because this all relates to what sorts of relationships people have in the community. Because the advisory committee really wanted to be involved, I put them to work. So with that, I did another analysis related to, okay, with all of these folks, who has these relationships? What are some of their priorities? Some of these folks, it's like, because of the timeline and even the project, it was really challenging to think about how we would really engage. For instance, the houseless people along the corridor, which really is highly impacted. So, thinking about different sort of strategies to begin with. So this is really just help frame the strategy, and then also frame the amount of time and resources that we put into it. I think part of the challenge as well is, as soon as we kind of got through this, you saw us all in this really great group doing sticky notes on flip charts and talking, and Erin's going to talk a little bit more about it, but COVID hit, and then it's like, oh, what do we do? And so I think I'll leave it at that with the engagement piece. We also did some discussion about residential anti-displacement. In particular, Commissioner Paul Savas was really concerned about displacement. There's a lot of mobile home parks, manufactured home parks, rentals as well, and being really concerned about who's going to get displaced out of this corridor area. So we have some strategies for residential. Unless we'll talk about kind of the small business displacement. But it was a really robust discussion. And I have to hand it to Clackamas County, because this is not the typical kind of engagement they do with community, especially with this equity focus. So they really leaned into it, and you got to start where you are. I mean, we can talk about the success on this as we move through this, which again was challenging for a number of reasons Erin will go into, but I think you have to start where you are, and it takes a long time necessarily, even if you're in person, to build relationship, trust, to engage with folks. And so it's not necessarily a one-off and transactional, because in the long run, it's really important to have this robust engagement and relationship. As far as with COVID, we had to pivot really quickly. What we did was we did a lot of things like surveys. I asked the advisory committee to say, well, why don't you have like a survey filling out Zoom party, or Facebook Live, where you bring all your friends and you go through the survey and you vote together. And we had some of the kind of senior centers where they actually did some work with Facebook Live, and got people together socially distanced to do some of the survey involvement. But we really didn't get down to the crux of as much engagement as we really would like to. So lessons learned. I think I'm done with that. So thanks.
All right, so I think next we're headed over to Alyssa to talk about the business anti-displacement strategy.
All right, thanks. So engaging in this corridor, and I think with all projects tied to, we see many of these throughout communities everywhere, it's really important to understand the business owner perspective, which is very different from the property owner or the developer, because not all the businesses don't typically own the building they're in. So the discussion of design guidelines, impacts to the properties aren't really the top of mind for them. What they're really focused on is, how am I going to get more customers? How can you help me get more capital to improve my business? So we use that mindset of what's in it for me, for those business owners, to engage them in the process. So we collaborated with a micro enterprise service organization called MISO, led by Nita Shaw, an incredible organization. And they started out of Portland, and actually the genesis of MISO is the Northeast Alberta corridor. They kind of came in too late into that project. There was already investment going on through urban renewal, through what was PDC at the time. It was starting to receive investment, and the tenants were being displaced. So MISO was brought in to help them. So we're using that lesson learned. And I think, we can look at now, I think Rockwood and Gresham is a really great example. but we wanted to bring it to this corridor as well, because I think it's incumbent on communities, and Clackamas County recognizes that, Metro recognizes this. All of this work for this framework plan, design guidelines, you are doing this as a community to attract new investment into an area. And we know what's going to happen with that new investment, right? Property values increase, rents increase. That turns into gentrification. So it's incumbent, I would say, upon communities going forward on these public investments to also think about, we know we're going to do this. If we're going to be attracting this investment, how do we take care of these businesses that are there now? So again, bringing in MISO, what we did is the county sent out a letter to all of the businesses in the area, letting them know MISO is going to come and talk to you. And MISO is critical because what they can do for many of these businesses is they have incredible credit enhancement programs or grant matching programs. For every $1,000 a business owner raises on their own, MISO will match it $3,000. Then they can go buy capital equipment and invest in their company. So MISO already has really compelling programs for many of these businesses. So they can, one, go in and help these businesses immediately, but then they can interest them in this design review process, the changes going on in the corridor. So they're aware ultimately investment's going to be coming. How do we get you ready either to be ready for the rent increases? So improve your businesses so that you can capture new business coming in and you can absorb the rents. Or so the image to the top, this Rocks Mystery Gallery, it's a standalone building. It's a prime example. They're leasing right now. Ideally, if the opportunity's there, we want this business to own that building because that's how they're going to build wealth. That's how they're going to build equity. If they buy into this corridor now, before the investment comes in, they're buying it at an affordable rate, they're going to capture wealth. So that's how we're thinking 10 years down the line in terms of how do we, one, keep the businesses there, and then how do we help them capture this wealth rather than being displaced by the newcomers coming in. So that's how we did that. Brought MISO in, we did the outreach, got these businesses engaged. And then ultimately what happened was Clackamas County saw the immense value of MISO being in this area. And now the county is investing, they've invested additional resources in MISO, and MISO now has a permanent, what they do, MISO's business model is they will partner in this situation there. They're partnering with Bank. They go out to the community to share their resources so that it's much easier for the businesses to come to them. You don't have to go to a government building, which unfortunately some of these businesses, there's a little distrust, there's some barriers there, but it's also more it's open into the public and the community. So that's how we address the anti-displacement, is really getting ahead of it and thinking about how do we make sure these businesses are successful and they can stay in the area, because I think that's a critical component of creating place, right? We can improve the landscaping, we can improve the building, but much of the activity is about going to the ice cream shop. It's about going to the local restaurant. It's about walking to these destinations. And we heard that throughout this process. Many of the residents were, one of their critiques was, and then one of their criticisms is there's nothing to walk to. There's no places to walk to. So that's the other element we need to be thinking about in terms of making this a great, vibrant place, is how can these businesses stay and grow and thrive as well.
Great, thanks, Alyssa.
Yep.
So Anita and Alyssa have talked about this great framework that we had for this project with the equitable engagement strategy, the interviews that were conducted with local businesses. That all provided us with some excellent context. I want to talk also a little bit about how we then executed the process and how that worked, particularly in 2020, which has been a really interesting year. In addition to the power analysis work that Anita described, during our kickoff, we also did a site walk with members of the CAC, our Citizen Advisory Committee, so that we could help see through their eyes how they experience their place, and so that we could have some one-on-one discussions as we walked around the area to get a better understanding of what some of the challenges were, share some of our observations, and also start to get to know the CAC a little bit better, since we would be working with them pretty closely over the coming year. Following that site walk, again, this is in the era of pre-COVID, we were also able to host a public open house at a local elementary school. And this was our big public event for our first task under our phase 2 work, which was to develop a set of guiding principles. And we had about 45 participants at this meeting. We had some really great discussions. We were able to engage folks with precedent imagery, with some keywords, do some sketching, all get together around the table, all those things that we all miss now in our current state. And got some wonderful input from the community. Took all of that, went back with the CAC, and drafted up a set of guiding principles for the project. And these are things like increasing employment opportunities in the area, increasing diversity and accessibility of housing, cultivating hearts and hubs for neighborhood activity, integrating natural systems, providing safe connections, all of those things. But I think what's important to note on this is that the language that's here is not the consultant team's language. This is actually the language of the CAC. It was generated by a CAC task force and then iterated through a series of CAC meetings. So it was really drafted up by the community, not by the consultant team. So we took all of this great content that the CAC generated for us, and we were gearing up for this wonderful collaborative session to start in on our framework planning process. We had sketched out a bunch of different ideas on trace. We had all of these base maps. We were getting ready to go, and then pandemic. So that threw us off a little bit. I believe the shutdown began the day that we were supposed to have our CAC session to work with them on the framework alternatives. So that was sort of happening live during the middle of our project. It was pretty intense. And then following shortly on the heels of that, the killing of George Floyd by at the hands of police, numerous other Black people, sparked protests and a general sense of cultural unrest. And we saw that in Portland. We're still seeing that in Portland. And putting all of these things together, our CAC needed a break. So we hit pause on our project for a few months and took a little break so that we could all kind of digest, reflect, figure out where we were in the world. And then we reconvened on the project again in July. And we had all of this great stuff on trace. We had to completely readapt all of our techniques for how to work with the CAC and how we were going to move forward next. So we, as a first pass, did have what was a semi-successful interactive session with the CAC, working with tablets to be able to do some interactive mapping with the group. But what we found ultimately more successful was generating a bunch of different alternatives. I think at the outset of the project, we had scoped, generating a standard of 3 alternatives. I think we ended up preparing something more like 10 or 11, so that we just had this bevy of different options to evaluate and discuss. Taking all of that input and working with the CAC through multiple sessions, as well as public input, we were able to finally land on this framework plan for the Park Ave station area. And Lorraine noted some of the difficulties in previous efforts around connectivity. So that's one piece that I want to highlight here. That was an area that of this plan that was really directly informed by the CAC and their input. So while we were trying to balance this goal of creating a more urban grid, a more walkable area, we also wanted to be sensitive to the fact that they really did not want vehicular connections moving through their single family neighborhoods. They also really did not want a number of intersections with the trolley trail. It's this really lovely bike and pedestrian trail, tree lined, quite beautiful. They didn't want to change the character of that. So we wanted to be respectful for that, and finally landed on this idea that you would have more of an urban grid in the commercial area, but you would really limit the number of connections that intersected with the trolley trail and really focus on bike and pedestrian connections to increase that connectivity. So from there, we also started working with the CAC on developing the development and design standards and updating those to be in alignment with the framework plan. And that's still in process at this point. That's one of the items that we're working on finalizing right now. But what I wanted to highlight on this is that in addition to talking about some of the change in requirements around density, around setbacks, around all of those kinds of things that we work with when we update code, we also spent a good deal of time going through what we called Zoning 101. So just talking about what are development and design standards and working through that with the CAC, helping to understand what can you regulate on private property? What can you regulate in the private or the public right-of-way? So based on all of that work, again, we were gearing up for our final public open house, virtual, for the project. And then wildfires broke out all across the state. And in fact, right next door to our project area. So this photo is of the Milwaukee Elks Lodge. It's a key site within our study area, and it's been acting as an evacuation site for people displaced by wildfires. So the night of our final open house, this was the evacuation map for Clackamas County, and our project site is right up here. So fortunately in the green zone, but still under evacuation orders. So we had a lot of back and forth with the county about whether to go through with this meeting. Ultimately decided, yes, we'll go ahead and move forward. And remarkably, we did have about 15 people participate that evening. And then an additional over 100 people viewed the recording of that online after the fact, and about 125 participated in our survey online. So decent participation, particularly given the circumstances. So in summary, you know, we had a pretty grand vision for what the engagement strategy for this project could be. And obviously, a lot of things came into play and got in our way, and we had to adapt and pivot. So we were able to do a number of things. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to some of the you know, coffee chats that CAC members wanted to host at their houses, presenting to different organizations within the neighborhood that just weren't meeting anymore, outreach to local schools, those types of things. We just simply couldn't make those things happen during the shutdown. So in conclusion, I also want to just take a quick look at, was our engagement process a success? How did we do? And for this, luckily with online surveys, you're also able to ask some questions about the demographics of your participants. And Anita wisely coached us all on which questions to ask and made sure that these were definitely included in our surveys. So I wanted to highlight just a couple of data points from our survey number 2, where we had about 287 participants, and our survey number 3, where we had 125 participants. So you can see from the racial makeup of our participants, pretty overwhelmingly white, although not exclusively. In terms of age, we had a lot of people in the 65 and older category participating, but a fair spectrum of other folks, particularly between the ages of 35 and 65. I think the one demographic we were really hoping to reach out to and didn't was youth, and being able to access students through school groups and things like that was just a challenge during this time. And then finally, also wanting to look at, did we reach diverse participants in terms of income? And, you know, we were hoping to really target low income folks in the community. And I think, you know, looking at this data, we didn't quite hit that. A lot of the people who participated in the survey fall into the more affluent range in terms of income. So with that, I wanted to just have the panel quickly conclude on some key takeaways from the project. And I can go ahead and start since I'm already talking. So a few thoughts that come to mind for me. I really think that our CAC, our Citizen Advisory Committee, was really the backbone of our engagement effort for this project. I think that that was an excellent decision by the county to put that in place, to go through the recruitment process, to be able to bring that group of people in. And they volunteered an amazing amount of time to this project to keep us moving. So I think that that was really, truly a success of this project. I think, one lesson learned, and this probably isn't a surprise, is that equitable engagement takes a lot of resources and a lot of time. And so as jurisdictions look at deploying strategies like this, I think that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. It really can't get sort of tucked into a standard project budget and a standard project schedule. And then finally, engagement during COVID is difficult. And that's probably not a surprise to anyone either. So that's what I'll offer up. Anita, would you like to jump in with anything else?
Sure. Thanks, Erin. I think in particular, my concern, you saw the survey, but who did we miss? Who cannot take the survey? We had the list of stakeholders that we didn't engage with. So again, you kind of have to start where you are. And also the kind of work I've done master planning work, something like this, but I've also been, for you architects, site specific, mostly affordable housing, and engaging with folks who are either residents or people who could live there in multiple languages, working with architects who actually speak their language as well. So I think there's a really great opportunity for all of you that are doing urban design work, or actually building work, to think about it differently. So who is your audience? I know you have to work with clients, but I think it's also probably incumbent on you to really push thinking about how engagement and how buildings are designed, especially if you're actually centering, your typical white European focus of building. And if, kind of that structure, you may learn something about how people are going to be living differently. And especially I think during COVID, we're seeing in other living situations, there's extended family. What does that look like? How do we do interior design, and then exterior with social distancing? So I'm going to encourage you all to think outside the box, both with how you do this design, how you engage with folks, and think about how people are living, and really, really focus on the folks who really don't have the ability, both influence and language ability and other sorts of things, and there's lots of best practices, but I also say you kind of have to start where you are. And with COVID, we're doing all kinds of different things, but really we're finding that we're still missing a lot of people, and one-on-one conversation with, working with service providers that are providing, at the food bank, or places where people are getting to do one-on-one surveys with service providers. So you have to be really creative. And, I kind of miss the days where we get together and get to do design work together, but it's going to evolve. So best of luck to you all.
Lorraine, did you want to offer anything else? Oh, you're muted.
I've had the opportunity to look at both projects, the Park Avenue Station Area Plan, as well as this particular plan, the Park Avenue Community Plan, and seeing the difference as to the value of reaching out to that public and engaging them from the very beginning, from them helping us write out the grant proposal to reaching out from the very beginning, being involved in the request for proposal, and just all avenues, and also partaking on the grant management team and not just the community advisory team. It's a very important tool. It's a lesson learned from the previous project that needed to be applied and has been. And I think thanks to our consultant team, they've done an amazing job on keeping them engaged. What I hope that will occur is that this community advisory team, committee, continues on. It's not just the end of this project, but that they continue on to ensure their vision that they work so diligently and hard on will actually come to fruition. it's going to be some time. As we all know, long range plans can take long range. It can be 20 years before this all evolves, but there's really a deep sense of transition for this corridor area. I work with current planning, so I'm seeing that transition as I work with community as well. When we're working with the design review committee and as developers, the architects, the urban designers come in for a project that's being proposed, the impact of the community can make your project difficult. It can make your project very easy. So it's something to keep in mind because it's a trend that won't go away.
And Alyssa, any other parting thoughts before we open up for questions?
No, I guess I would just encourage this group to recognize that business owners are not your typical attendee for the public engagement, but to realize you have a really great opportunity when you're doing the outreach to get them services that'll help them. So what we did was bring in the economic development department, which isn't your typical go-to department depending on your community in these types of projects, but we got them engaged, highly now focused on small business opportunities in the area. So I think it's a unique opportunity to engage the businesses, and I'd encourage consultants to think about that going forward on these types of projects.
Great. All right. Do we have any questions? We have
yes. I don't know, Brian Stir, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and if anyone has a specific question, please type it into the chat, and then I will kind of try to summarize and take care of any duplicates that might pop up. But the first question that we have here is from David, asking about the financial analysis component to this and the assistance, and he's wondering if any of that is a replicable model for other metro communities.
You want me to respond to that, Erin?
That would be great.
So the phase one element that was touched on in this project, so our firm Bridge led that component. And what we really focused on in phase one, and Erin showed some of those slides, really getting to understand the demographics, what are the market situations, what are the market dynamics in this area, and where that really kind of framed up grounded the realities. One of the points we made is there's been no commercial investment in 10 years in this area, except for, I think, a Popeye's chicken. So I think that kind of sets the level of investment and understanding. And then all of that was really done in phase one. And I think I will applaud the county and Metro in doing that. They learned their lesson. I think the question was, well, if this didn't get approved in 2012, why are we going to do this again? And so we took that baby step of just, let's look at the demographics, the market conditions, and really understand that as the opportunities. And we got the community engaged to sign off to go into this in-depth opportunity that was led by Sarah. So I think those two steps, and what was nice about that, I would say, reflecting back, we didn't start putting anything on paper, right? There was nothing, there was no pedestrian connections, no design, no nothing. It was just purely based on the demographics and the market information. So I thought that was a nice opportunity. And we got that grounded in phase one. And I think it just leveled the set of where everyone expectations going forward. And then we did do one site-specific pro forma analysis, conveyed again to the county. You have got to, so that's one of the challenges going forward that we're talking about in the actions. There's no urban renewal in Clackamas County, right? But in Beaverton, you have it. In Gresham, you have it. In Hillsborough, you have it. And just through that pro forma, we were saying, you're not alone, Park Avenue. Everyone faces this, but you're going to need tools to really see the level of investment that you want to have.
Great, thank you. There was a comment from William Leonard's giving some kudos, pivoting with COVID and just wondering what the next steps might be moving forward into this new altered normal that we have.
Oh my goodness, that is a great question. And it I guess it feels like we've hit maybe a point of stasis at the moment where we're all accustomed to this new virtual world. But for a while there, it felt like everything was changing very dynamically, and we'll see where things are headed in coming months. But I mean, I think, you can do a lot with virtual platforms. It just takes a different application. And I think the big challenge, particularly when you're talking about equity, is how do you reach people who don't have access to a computer? And I think that's a conundrum that we're all going to have to continue to struggle with as we look at outreach moving forward. Anita, did you have any other thoughts you wanted to offer on that one?
Sure. I think, like I mentioned, it is going to be different, and I doubt we're going to be back to, I'm not even going to call it normal, but the way we used to do things. And, like I said, I've spent like the last 12 years in my kind of career developing relationships and doing community engagement, especially with racially diverse, low-income folks that supposedly are hard to find, but also like building capacity in organizations and other consultants to really understand how to do this in a different way. And so now we're having to not even pivot, but just really be really responsive to understand kind of even what Alyssa said is what are folks dealing with? Why is this important to them, and why should we engage? So also managing expectations of, whoever you're working with, if you want to do that, and government organizations in particular, they're wanting you to focus on that. But we have done some work, some of the stuff we've done is just people using their phones again and interviewing, again, working with direct service providers. And so allocating resources. And as Erin mentioned, you may have to allocate, 80% of your resources to reach 15% of the people that are most impacted. But that's what equity is. And so I want to make sure, that all these surveys and all these online sort of things is that you continually ask, who are we missing, and how do we do it in a better way? And how do we build a longer term relationships or lean on relationships that either in your firms or within your personal network or professional network or folks in the neighborhood? Because that's really engagement in particular, if we're calling it engagement as opposed to outreach, is really a relationship, and it's not transactional. And if it becomes that way, you're probably not going to get folks to come talk to you. So it's really important to look at it in the long run. It's really satisfying. It's really robust, and you'll get some amazing results that you never thought you would.
And I'll just add to that. I think one surprising, again, back to that phase one component, one thing we did, and Anita commented this, I think the phones are more accessible. One thing we did, we stood at this Park Avenue Transit, the light rail station at the evening peak commute hour, and handed out little flyers with QR codes. So everyone could do a quick survey when they're commuting home. And we got about 365 survey responses. So as a thought going forward, that's pretty quick capture within 2 hours for outreach to consider.
Now that people are kind of trained to engage on the virtual content, and it should be something we don't discard. We probably won't have an opportunity to discard it. It's something to put in your toolbox to use in the future. And another comment I wanted to make is going back to the phase one, phase two. Whereas, yes, I totally understand why Metro required us to do the phase one to make sure that we got the buy-off from the community. The negative part on that is the time and financial cost of that effort. It required us to delay the project further, and it was more expensive to pursue it in a two-phase process. So that's something, if people decide, well, that does sound like a good idea, I think we probably should consider it for our project. Think of the financial part too, that needs to be addressed.
Excellent, thank you. Peter from Metro Parks Tacoma has a question here. Did you find any barriers to participation during the planning, and did you have any kind of incentives or strategies to help encourage participation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the barriers that we were seeing in terms of participation changed during the course of our project, right? COVID really put new barriers in place that we weren't anticipating when we started off. On the note of incentives, we did actually carve out a portion of the consultant expense budget because we weren't driving anywhere anymore. So we weren't going to be expensing mileage and things, and carve that out to be able to use that for incentives for participation in a focus group. And that was specifically targeted at low income folks and renters. So Lorraine kind of took point on going door to door at multiple apartment buildings in the area and passing out flyers in person, and then also getting flyers into school lunch boxes through the school lunch program that was being offered through the summer. And we, made a big push to try to get as much participation as we could. We offered incentives for that participation. We had one lovely individual named Joanna who came to our focus group, and we had a wonderful conversation with Joanna. But we were a little bit disappointed that we didn't get broader participation.
And I think to answer Peter's question, the things that you have there in the chat box as far as different times a day, transportation, providing maybe transportation funding to, get people to get different places, childcare, even providing food from local vendors. I mean, those have been best practices, especially to get racially diverse community members, because we couldn't do that. That was the challenge. But those are some best practices that we've done for quite a while, stipends and actually paying community-based organizations. And that's what actually you can do now, is so like direct service providers or actually culturally based organizations, to pay them to do the focus groups, to do surveys, to talk to folks, either in their language or multiple languages, and then build this relationship with them to help kind of support the project. But it takes some, not only resource allocation, but budget as well.
Nita, thanks. I wanted to mention that. So I just wanted to echo. So MISA, who I mentioned, they were included on our contract. So we need to respect these community-based organizations, these nonprofits. The relationships they have with these businesses and the services they can provide should be compensated. So we built them into our contract. They did not do it for free. So I think that's an important note you made. Yeah.
And I think in barriers in respect to the business entities, the barriers will stay the same, I would think. Alyssa, you can address this as well, I hope. The barriers of availability, even with putting things online, encouraging them to attend meetings physically, it's always a challenge of their work time. You also have absentee property owners that are along the corridor, again, and they're not local, they are somewhere else. So it's also difficult to get in touch with those parties. Part of the stipends that Anita mentioned is offering the business owners $50 certificate. We were thinking of doing it for electricity billing or sewer water bills and such, but we still didn't get a response on it. So we had a huge unknown happening this year in 2020. So it's hard to assess, was it because of what everybody was encountering at this point in time? Or was it because it was a stipend that didn't just work for this particular venue?
Thank you so much. I think we're just about at the hour, top of the hour. So there's one last question from David, just asking about following up. Is there any way that folks who maybe have additional questions can follow up with the panel?
Mm-hmm.
Right on cue. Yeah, I mean, if you have additional questions and you'd like to reach out to us, please feel free. We'd be happy to answer them. And thank you all so much for spending your lunch hour with us in this virtual realm and letting us tell you a little bit about the Park Ave project. We hope that we were able to share some lessons learned that are useful to you all in your work.
Yeah, thank you. On behalf of the executive committee, I think you guys did a great job of kind of laying out some new realities for us all, but also, ideally becoming much more engaged in this in our urban design projects in a way that really include everybody in the decision-making process ultimately. So thanks a lot, you guys. Good job, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.